I had the excavation report of a tomb in the Valley of the Kings that was excavated over 120 years ago by the French archaeologist Victor Loret. I had to actually get it translated into English so that I could read it. And when I read it, I thought, why isn't this tomb known? Why isn't this famous? And so I got my son, we got on an airplane, we flew from Amman, Jordan, where I live, to Luxor, Egypt, across the Nile River, to the Valley of the Kings. So in 1898, Victor Loret was here excavating at the base of this cliff behind me here. And he saw the chisel marks were coming down and concentrated in the area that he was unburying. He realized he was at the entrance of a tomb, and then he found a funerary statuette in front of this tomb with the name Amenhotep II on it. So by the time he had opened up the entrance to the tomb, and he and a co-worker entered into that tomb, he already knew that this was the tomb of Amenhotep II.
Now, regardless of what we might believe about the Exodus Pharaoh, we should hear the story of this discovery and understand what the Bible has to say about it. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. I'll leave a link in the description where you can order a copy of my book, Where God Came Down, the Archaeological Evidence, which is #1 in archaeology. I'll also leave a link where you can make a donation. These are greatly appreciated and used for the production of future videos. Loret wrote, "The state of the gallery showed that the tomb was not untouched. I expected this because of the broken antiquities found outside." When Loret got into the tomb, he could see that it had already been looted. This is typical. Almost all of the tombs that found in the Valley of the Kings had been looted at some point in the past. This meant that all the valuable things would have been taken by the looters, and only what they would consider not to be valuable would be in the tomb. And of course, when we got there, the one tomb that we had come to explore was closed. When I'd been to the Valley of the Kings before, it was closed. Why is what I consider to be the most important tomb in the Valley of the Kings. Why is it closed? And so I've lived in the Middle East long enough to know that if there's a lock, then somebody's got a key. And if you can find that somebody, or find somebody that knows that somebody, then you can usually barter a deal.
If I can help you to visit this tomb, how much are you going to pay? Because I have to pay to the manager, to the securities, a lot of people take money.
You tell me.
So we negotiated, agreed to a price where they would let not only my son and I into the tomb, but we could use our camera in there as well. But we only had 30 minutes, so we were in a hurry.
So we're here at the now excavated tomb of Amenhotep II, but me and my production assistant David have recreated it for you in 3D, just to kind of give you a feel of what it might have looked like for Loret, the original excavator, as he was going through this tomb for the first time, just by the light of a candle.
After walking and at times crawling through the long tunnel, Loret and his foreman soon came to this deep shaft. Loret included this drawing in his report and wrote, "Always descending, we eventually found ourselves at the edge of a deep and wide shaft, which was not to be crossed."
It's a wonder with the light of just a single candle that one of them didn't fall in. However, it did slow them down. They had to go back out, get a ladder, bring it back in, put it down into the bottom of this deep well, climb down to the bottom, move the ladder over to the other side, climb back up in order to continue down the tunnel of this tomb.
They continued through the next part of the tunnel before entering into a room with two pillars in the middle. Loret wrote that against the back wall I advanced with a candle, and a dreadful sight. A corpse is there, lying on the boat, all black, hideous, its grimacing face turned towards me and looking at me. I mean, think about how spooky this would be. You're down deep in this tomb, exploring it for the first time. You have only what is being illuminated by a single candle, and what's staring back at you is the face of a mummy.
Okay, this is the two-pillared room. So it was against this wall that they found the mummy that was laying in the boat.
Loret wrote, at the end, a door opens into the darkness. We advance, and with astonishment we distinguish an immense room, entirely decorated, supported by 2 rows of 3 pillars on which are painted life-size groups representing a king in the presence of a deity. It is indeed him. It is indeed Amenhotep II.
This is the 6-pillared room.
At the back of the 6-pillared room, Loret descended the stairs leading down to the royal sarcophagus, whose lid has been removed by the looters. Loret wrote, "Is the open sarcophagus empty? I dare not hope otherwise, for pharaohs have never been found in the necropolis of the Valley of the Kings. All royal mummies have been removed in antiquity and placed in a safe location. I reached the sepulchre with difficulty. I read everywhere outside the name and title of Amenhotep II. I lean over the edge, advancing a candle. Victory! A dark coffin is there at the bottom.
This is the staircase that came down. This is the sarcophagus of Amenhotep II. So Loret is explaining that when he comes in, there's broken on the floor. So he creeps over here. He sees that the lid is off the sarcophagus. He looks over the edge down, and to his great surprise and delight, there is a coffin at the bottom of the sarcophagus.
So at this point, Loret doesn't try to open the coffin. He comes back up the stairs into the main chamber. In the 6-pillared room, Loret found funerary statuettes and wrote, "All are in the name Amenhotep II. One of them, however, bears the name of the royal prince, Senu. He finds all these funerary statuettes. What the ancient Egyptians believed is that these would do menial tasks, magically serve the deceased in the afterlife. One of these funerary statuettes was inscribed with a different name that would become known as Based on this find alone, Loret reasoned that this must be the son of Amenhotep II, the royal prince. We moved to the chambers on the right. We moved to the chambers on the right. In the first one, upon entering, an incredible sight strikes us. 3 corpses lie side by side at the back. The second corpse in the middle is that of a child about 15 years old. He is naked with his hands placed on the abdomen. The mummy in the middle was that of a young boy between the age of 15 and 11. The head has been shaved except for one spot on the right temple, from which a magnificent lock of black hair emerges. This was the hairstyle of royal princes, and I immediately think of the royal prince Weben Senu. What was unique about this mummy was the hairstyle. This boy had a shaved head, and then coming out the side was this ponytail, which is known as a horse or a prince's lock. This was the hairstyle symbolically that was worn by the children of the king. In fact, we have in these reliefs the pharaohs that ruled Egypt, some of them depicted as children, where they're wearing this prince's lock.
This is the room where the boy was found.
This is the room where the boy was found, the boy mummy.
Oh, that's where his mummy is. Okay, this is The mummy of the boy.
Oh, that's where his mummy is. Okay, this is the mummy of the boy that's still in this coffin. In the room where it was discovered. I'm just in shock here because I was not expecting the mummy to be here. I'd heard, I'd read that he is still in the room here, but inside this coffin is the mummy with a princess lock that
Loret
is the
continued.
most probable
The royal prince
mummy
Webensenu,
to be
this until
Webensenu.
now unknown son. Loret continued. The royal prince Webensenu, this until now unknown son of Amenhotep II, of whom I had noticed a funerary statuette in the great room, and one of whom I was later to find canopic fragments.
So
This
afterwards,
is the
what
passage
Loret also
where they
found
found the
in the tomb was
canopic
these
jar
fragments of what are
fragments
called
and lids.
canopic jars.
So afterwards,
And,
what Loret
one
also
of them
found in
was
the tomb
inscribed with
was
the name
these
Webensenu,
fragments of what are called canopic
and,
jars.
also had
And
the saying,
one of them was
"King's son
inscribed
of
with the
his
name
body."
Webensenu.
Now, what is a
and,
canopic jar?
also
in the
had the
mummification
saying,
process,
"King's
they
son
removed
of
the
his body."
organs from the body. And
Now,
they treated
what is a
them
canopic
separately,
jar?
and
In the
eventually they were
mummification
placed in what is
process,
called a
they
canopic
removed
jar.
the organs
And
from
then
the body
oftentimes
and
the
they
jar
treated
was
them
inscribed with the
separately,
name
and eventually
of
they
the
were
deceased
placed in
whom
what is called
these
a
organs
canopic jar.
belonged to.
And then
And so
oftentimes
this
the jar was
slam dunk
inscribed with the
evidence
name
that,
of the
Webensenu was
deceased
buried
whom
in
these
this tomb,
organs belonged to.
because here we
And
have
so
the
this was
organs in
slam
this jar
dunk
inscribed
evidence
with his
that
name. So the
Webensenu was
interpretation
buried
of
in
Loret
this
was
tomb.
very
Because
logical and
here we have his
obvious.
organs
He
in this jar
identified the
inscribed
mummy
with
of
his
the young
name.
boy
So the
as
interpretation of
the royal
Loret
prince,
was
the
very
son of
logical and
Amenhotep
obvious.
II.
He identified the mummy
and
of the
that
young
this was his
boy
mummy. Now,
as
it's not
the
just
royal
Loret's
prince, the son of
interpretation, but we
Amenhotep
have
II,
the standard
and,
work of the royal
and that
families
this was
in a
his
book
mummy.
called The
Now, it's
Complete
not
Royal
just
Families of
Loret's
Ancient Egypt.
interpretation,
The entry in this
but we
book for
have
Webensenu
the
reads,
standard
"Son of
work of the
Amenhotep
royal
II,
families in a book
died
called
as
The
a
Complete
child
Royal
and buried with
Families
his
of
father
Ancient
in tomb
Egypt."
KV
The entry in this
35,
book for
where his
Webensenu
probable body
reads,
still
"Son of
lies,
Amenhotep
named on the block
II, died as
statue
a
of
child
Minmos
and
from
buried with his
Karnak.
father in
This
tomb
inscription
KV
from Karnak
35,
specifically
where his
mentions
probable body
Webensenu
still
as the
lies,
son of
named on the
Amenhotep
block
II.
statue of Minmos from Karnak. This inscription from Karnak specifically mentions
So
Webensenu
afterwards,
as
he
the
goes
son
to
of
the chamber on the
Amenhotep
left.
II.
He looks in there. He sees 9 coffins that are stacked next to each other in this chamber. And he doesn't
So
try to
afterwards,
open them
he
at
goes
this
to
point.
the chamber on
He
the
looks
left.
around some
He
more.
looks
He
in
makes
there.
his way
He
out of
sees
the tomb,
9
and this is the
coffins
end
that
of
are
his
stacked next
initial
to each other in this
exploration
chamber.
of the tomb
And
of
he doesn't try to
Amenhotep
open
II.
them at this
Later,
point.
he comes back
He
into
looks
the
around
tomb
some more. He
for
makes
the
his way
purpose
out of the
removing
tomb, and this
the
is the
mummies
end of
from
his
their coffins.
initial
And of course, the most
exploration
important one
of the tomb of
is the
Amenhotep
coffin that he found at the bottom of
II.
the
Later, he
royal
comes back
sarcophagus.
into the
When he
tomb
opens
for the
this
purpose
coffin,
of removing the
inside is
mummies
a
from
mummy
their
that's
coffins.
wrapped in
And
a
of course,
shroud,
the
and on
most
the
important
shroud is
one
written the name
is the coffin that he
Amenhotep
found at the
II.
bottom of
So
the
there
royal
is absolutely no
sarcophagus.
doubt
When he
that
opens
the
this
mummy that he
coffin,
found in the
then
royal
inside is a
sarcophagus
mummy that's wrapped
was
in a
the mummy
shroud,
of
and on the
Amenhotep
shroud is
II.
written the name
So this mummy
Amenhotep
was taken
II.
in,
So
and
there is
further studied
absolutely
by
no
G. Elliott
doubt
Smith,
that the mummy
and
that
his
he
work
found
was
in the royal
published in the catalog
sarcophagus
of the royal
was the
mummies.
mummy
And what
of
he found
Amenhotep
particularly
II.
unique
So this
about
mummy was
this
taken
mummy
then and
was
further
that,
studied
as
by
he
G.
described
Elliott
it, the whole
Smith,
body was covered
and
with
his
what he
work was
called
published
tubercles.
in the catalog of the
These
royal mummies. And
boil-like
what he found
sores.
particularly
And he
unique
didn't know
about
if it was
this
a disease
mummy
that caused
was
this,
that,
or
as
if
he
it was
described it,
something
the whole
else, but
body
he
was
said,
covered with what he
wrote
called
down, they are
tubercles.
certainly
These
unusual.
boil-like
And
sores.
so unique, actually, that
And he
of
didn't
all
know
the mummies
if
that
it
were
was a
found in the
disease
Valley
that
of the
caused
Kings,
this,
the
or if it
only
was
one
something else.
that
But
was
he
covered
said,
with these
he
boil-like
wrote down,
sores
they are
was the
certainly
mummy of
unusual.
Amenhotep II.
And so unique, actually, that of
Let's look
all
at
the
this one.
mummies that were found in the Valley of the Kings, the only one that was covered with these
This is the
boil-like
room back
sores
here where
was
the
the
kings
mummy of
were found
Amenhotep
in their
II.
coffins. And so,
Let's look at this one.
I mean, it's amazing that we've been able to get in here. When he started opening
This is
up
the room
these
back
other
here
coffins
where the
in this other
kings
chamber, he
were
saw that
found
they also
in their
were
coffins.
pharaohs. So in
And so,
antiquity, the tombs in the Valley of the Kings
it's
were being
amazing that we've been
looted.
able to get in here.
And
When
to
he started
protect the
opening
pharaohs
up
that were
these
buried
other
in their
coffins in
tombs,
this other
they
chamber,
were
he saw
taken
that
from
they
their
also
tombs and
were
put in
pharaohs.
these caches.
So in antiquity,
For their
the
protection.
tombs
And
in the
so
Valley
this
of the
is
Kings
what
were
Loret
being
found in the
looted,
tomb of Amenhotep
and
II,
to
is a
protect
cache
the
of
pharaohs
these
that were
other
buried
pharaohs
in their tombs,
in these 9
they were
coffins
taken
that
from
had
their
been
tombs
taken
and put
from
in these
their original
caches
burial tombs
for their protection. And so this is what Loret found in the tomb of Amenhotep. Amenhotep II is a cache of these other pharaohs in these 9 coffins that had been taken from their original burial tombs into this cache for safekeeping. So interestingly, one of the mummies that was in these coffins was Thutmose IV. He is the one who is the successor of his father, Amenhotep II, to the throne, the younger brother of Web-en-Senu. Okay, so that's what Loret found in his discovery and excavation of the tomb of Amenhotep II. Now what we need to do is bring the Bible into it and look at the details of what it tells us about the Exodus Pharaoh. Exodus 12 says, "The Lord struck down all the firstborn in Egypt, including the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on the throne." So we know from the biblical account that the Exodus Pharaoh, his firstborn, died before he did. And then we know from what was found in the tomb of Amenhotep II that he had a son, Web-en-Senu, who died before he did, because he was buried in his tomb. Once a king dies, then he's buried in his tomb with his belongings and his treasures, and that tomb is sealed for certain that Web-en-Senu died before his father because he's buried in his tomb. And this is an incredible match.
And most probably, this is the oldest son of Amenhotep II, therefore the one who would have died in the plague of the firstborn.
Exodus 9:10 says, "So they took soot from a furnace and stood before Pharaoh. Moses tossed it into the air, and festering boils broke out on people and animals." When Smith examined the body of Amenhotep II, these, as he called them, tubercles were all over his skin. And in fact, you can see this when you go to the Egyptian Museum and see the mummy of Amenhotep II to this day. You'll see these boil-like sores on his skin. I don't want to make too much of this.
We don't know anything for sure.
We don't know anything for sure. But I also don't want to make too little of it either. Isn't it interesting
Amenhotep II is the Exodus Pharaoh
and is the one that Moses stood before and threw the soot up into the air, and then the boils broke out. That he's the one that lived through that plague, and Amenhotep II is of all the kings that have been found, their mummies have been found,
that has boils,
his
like
is
sores
the one
all over his body.
that has boils.
Yo, that's
like
why it's good to know
all
your
over his
history,
body.
study up on your history. Like when the Bible talks about certain stories like Moses and the Exodus Pharaoh, this stuff is true, this stuff is real, this stuff actually happened. It was just recorded. Let's go.
So when I did a video in the past on the Pharaoh of the Exodus,
Pharaoh of the Exodus, one of the major complaints was that we shouldn't have a mummy of the Pharaoh of the Exodus because he drowned in the sea crossing,
there's two
and
reasons
therefore his body
in the
would have been
Bible
lost.
itself that we should
There's
expect
two
to have
reasons
the mummy of the Pharaoh
in the
of
Bible
Exodus.
itself
The
that
first
we
one,
should
which
expect
is
to
the
have
most
the mummy of
important,
the Pharaoh of the
is
Exodus.
that
The
the
first
biblical
one,
account
which
does
is the
not
most
say
important,
that the
is
Pharaoh
that
of the
the
Exodus
biblical
drowned
account
in the
does
sea
not
crossing.
say that the Pharaoh
Exodus
of the
14:23 says that the
Exodus
Egyptians
drowned in the sea
pursued and went in
crossing.
after them.
Exodus
into the midst of the sea.
14:23
This
says that the
included all
Egyptians
Pharaoh's
pursued and
forces,
went in
chariots, and
after
his
them
horsemen.
into
But
the
it doesn't
midst
say
of the
Pharaoh
sea.
himself
This
went in.
included all Pharaoh's
Exodus
forces, his
14:28
chariots, and his
says,
horsemen.
"The waters
But it
returned
doesn't
and
say
covered the
Pharaoh
chariots and
himself
the
went into
horsemen.
the sea.
Of all
Exodus
the hosts of
14:28
Pharaoh,
says,
and it
"The waters
specifically says
returned
that
and covered the
followed them
chariots
into
and
the
the
sea,
horsemen."
not
Of
one
all the
remained."
hosts of Pharaoh,
And this is
and it
typical
specifically
of how
says
it
that
works with
followed them
kings.
into the sea,
Kings send
not
their
one
armies into the
remained.
battle. Maybe
And this
their
is
armies are
typical of
defeated,
how it works
but
with
they
kings.
themselves are not
Kings
in the
send their
midst
armies
fighting
into
the battle themselves.
Maybe
lives
their
too
armies are
valuable for
defeated.
that.
Similarly,
but
Psalm
they
136:15
themselves are
doesn't
not
say
in
the
the midst
miracle killed,
fighting the
but
battle
rather
themselves.
overthrew
Their
Pharaoh.
lives are too
It
valuable
doesn't say
for
that they're
that.
drowned in the sea
Similarly,
crossing.
Psalm
In fact, it implies that
136:15
he
doesn't
did
say the
not.
miracle
Even
killed,
if
but
Pharaoh
rather
did
overthrew
die in the
Pharaoh.
sea crossing,
It doesn't say that
we
Pharaoh
still would
drowned in the
expect
sea
to have
crossing. In
his
fact, it
mummy,
implies
because
that
it
really he
says
did
in
not.
Exodus
Even if
14:30
Pharaoh
that
did
Israel
die in the
saw
sea crossing,
the Egyptians
we
lying
still would
dead on the
expect to
seashore.
have his
They
mummy,
saw
because it
the
says in
bodies of
Exodus
those who were drowned.
14:30
And from
that
the
Israel
Egyptian
saw
perspective, then,
the
most
Egyptians
important body
lying
to
dead
recover
on the
would have been the
seashore.
body of the
They
Pharaoh.
saw
So either way you look
the
at it,
bodies
you would
of those
expect
who
to
had
have the
drowned.
mummy of
And from
Pharaoh
the
of the
Egyptian
Exodus.
perspective, then,
We have to
the
talk at
most
least
important
briefly
body to
about the
recover
biblical
would have
date
been the
of the
body of the
Exodus. I'm just
Pharaoh.
gonna do this real
So
quick
either
and
way
then
you
move
look
on.
at it, you would expect to have a mummy of
from
the
the
Pharaoh
Exodus
of
to
the
the time when
Exodus.
Solomon built
We have to
the
talk
temple
at least briefly
in Jerusalem,
about the
there were
biblical date of the
480
Exodus.
years.
I'm just
We
going to do
know
this
when
real quick and
Solomon
then
built
move
the
on.
temple,
1 Kings 6:1
How do
says
we know
that from
Well,
the
I did a
Exodus
whole
to the
video
time when
on that,
Solomon
using
built
that as an
the
example,
temple
and
in
you can watch
Jerusalem,
that after you
there
get
were
done watching this
480
one.
years.
But
We know
that
when
was
Solomon
966
built the
BC.
temple,
You just do the
966
simple math
BC.
for the
How do we know
480
that?
years,
Well,
and we
I
have
did a
a
whole
solid
video
date
on
for
that, using that as
the
an
Exodus
example,
from the
and you can
Bible,
watch that
which is
after you get done
1446
watching this
BC.
one. But we
Now,
know that that was
Egyptian
966
chronology is
BC. You
not
just do
as
the
well
simple
understood,
math
and
with
it
the
is not
480
agreed
years.
upon even
And
by
we have a
secular
solid date
Egyptologists.
for
Some follow
the
what is called the
Exodus
high
from the
chronology,
Bible,
some follow
which is
the low
1446
chronology.
BC.
The dates of
Now,
the reign of
Egyptian
Amenhotep
chronology
II
is not
and the biblical
as well
date
understood,
fit very,
and it
very
is
well
not
with the high
agreed upon
chronology.
even by
But
secular
regardless, there's
Egyptologists.
an
Some
understanding
follow
that
what is called the high
dates when these
chronology,
kings
some follow the low
reigned are
chronology.
known
The
within
dates
about 50
of
years. You
the
could
reign
add
of
50 years or
Amenhotep
minus 50 years
II
to
and
that.
the biblical date
The
fit
point
very,
that I
very
wanna make
well with the
before
high
moving on
chronology.
is simply this,
But
that
regardless,
if we
there's
take
an
the biblical date
understanding
for the
that the
Exodus,
dates when
and
these
whether we
kings
follow the high
reigned
chronology
are
or the low
known
chronology,
within
whether
about
we
50
add
years.
50
You
years
could
or
add
take
50 years or
from
minus
it,
50 years
we're
to them.
still looking for
The point that I
Exodus
want to make
Pharaoh
before
in the
moving on
18th
is simply
dynasty of
this,
Egypt.
that if we
The
take the
17th
biblical date for
dynasty
the
is way too
Exodus,
early.
and
The
whether we follow
19th
the high
dynasty is over
chronology or the
200
low
years too
chronology,
late.
whether
So
we
the
add 50 years or
Exodus
take
Pharaoh
50
is
years from
somewhere in the
it, we're
18th
still
dynasty.
looking for
We
the
have
Exodus
here
Pharaoh
in
in the
these
18th
discoveries
dynasty
what,
of Egypt.
what
The
Loret
17th dynasty
calls
is
in
way
his
too early.
report
The 19th
strange
dynasty is over
chronological
200 years too
series of
late.
these
So
discoveries because
the
they
Exodus
followed the
Pharaoh
lineage
is
of the
somewhere
royal
in the
family of the
18th dynasty. We
Before
have
he
here
found
in
the
these
tomb of
discoveries
Amenhotep II, previously, in
what
that same
Loret
excavation
calls
season,
in his
he had discovered
report
and excavated
the strange
tomb of
chronological
Thutmose
series
III,
of
the
these
father of
discoveries because they
Amenhotep II.
followed the
What is
lineage
unique about
of the
Thutmose
royal
III was the
family
length
of
of his
18th
reign.
dynasty.
He reigned for
Before he
54
found
years.
the tomb of Amenhotep
Exodus chapter 2
II,
says that Pharaoh tried
previously,
to kill
in that
Moses,
same
but Moses
excavation
fled from
season,
Pharaoh to
he had
Midian.
discovered and
During that long
excavated
period, the king of Egypt
tomb
died, finally
Thutmose
allowing
III,
Moses to
the
return
father
to
of
Egypt.
Amenhotep
This
II.
long period.
What is unique
when
about
Moses was in
Thutmose
Midian,
III was the
we are
length
told
of his
in
reign.
Acts
He
7:30,
reigned for
ended
54
after 40
years.
years.
Exodus chapter 2
And
says
then
that
he
Pharaoh
comes
tried to
back,
kill
and at
Moses,
this point,
but Moses
then the
fled
next
from Pharaoh
Pharaoh
to
is
Midian.
reigning,
During that
and
long
this is the
period, the
Pharaoh
king
of
of
the
Egypt
Exodus.
died,
So in
finally
order for
allowing
this to
Moses to
work,
return to
then
Egypt.
we need
This
the
long period,
predecessor of the Exodus
when Moses
Pharaoh
was
to
in
have a
Midian,
very
we
long
are told in
reign
Acts
of
7:30,
over 40
ended
years.
after
And
40
the only
years.
Pharaoh in the 18th dynasty
And then
that
he
reigned
comes
for more than
back,
40
and at this
years
point, then
is
the next
Thutmose
Pharaoh
III.
is
He reigned for
reigning,
54
and this is
years,
the Pharaoh of
and
the
he
Exodus.
is the father
So in
of
order for this to
Amenhotep
work,
II.
then we
Therefore,
need
of all
the
the pharaohs of the
predecessor of the
18th
Exodus
dynasty,
Pharaoh to have
the
a
only
very
pharaoh
long
that
reign
passes
of
this
over 40
requirement
years.
from the Bible
And the only
is
Pharaoh in the
Amenhotep II,
18th
because
dynasty
his
that
father
reigned for more than 40
years.
years
I mean, how
is
much more
Thutmose
obvious could
III.
it
He
be
reigned for
from what
54
Loret
years,
found in
and
the
he
tomb
is
of
the
Amenhotep
father
II?
of
He found the
Amenhotep
mummy
II.
of Amenhotep II.
Therefore, of all the pharaohs
that
of the
had a
18th
shroud wrapped around
dynasty,
it, which
the
had
only
Amenhotep
pharaoh
II's
that
name on it.
passes this requirement from the
He found this
Bible
mummy that was
is
covered with these
Amenhotep II
oil-like
because
sores.
his father reigned for over 40
he found
years.
the son
I mean,
of
how much
Amenhotep
more
II,
obvious
Levinsenu,
could it be
found
from
his
what
name
Loret
inscribed on a
found
funerary
in the tomb
statuette.
of Amenhotep
He found his
II?
name
He
inscribed
found the
on
mummy
a
of
canopic jar,
Amenhotep
and he
II
found the mummy
that
of a
had a
boy
shroud
with
wrapped
the
around
prince's
it,
law.
which had Amenhotep II's
I
name
mean,
on
we're
it.
talking about why is this not
He found this mummy
the
that was
most
covered with
famous
these boil-like
tomb
sores.
from the Valley of the Kings? It
He
should
found
be,
the son
and yet it's
of Amenhotep
closed.
II, Webinsenu.
And
He found his
people
name
don't know
inscribed
about
on a
it.
funerary
And-
statuette.
And then when you
he
look
found
it
his
up
name inscribed
today
on a canopic jar,
on the
and he
internet or
found
wherever
the
you're doing
mummy
research,
of a
then the
boy
more
with the
modern
prince's
takes on
law.
this are all arguing against
I mean,
these
we're
positions
talking
that
about,
were well
why is this
established and
not
understood in the past.
the most
They're the ones
famous
that the
tomb
evidence
from the Valley
bears
of the
witness
Kings?
to.
It should be,
And yet now
it's
all these
closed.
arguments, it's a focus of
And
these arguments.
people don't know about
480
it.
years doesn't really mean
And
480
And then
years.
when you look it
Oh,
up
the length of
today
this,
on
reign
the,
isn't really the
on
length
the
of
internet
just
or
one
wherever
pharaoh's
you're
reign,
doing
but
your
of more
research,
than one
then the
pharaoh's
more
reign.
modern
Oh,
takes on
this,
this are
mummy
all
that was
arguing
found
against
in
these positions
Amenhotep
that were
II's
well
tomb isn't
established
really
and
the
understood
son
in
of
the
Amenhotep
past.
II, but
They're
this
the
other
ones that the
pharaoh.
evidence
On and on
bears
and on.
witness to.
Why? Why
And yet
is the
now
focus
all
of
these
this
arguments,
argument
it's
on
a
Amenhotep
focus of
II?
these arguments.
The simple
480
answer to
years
that
doesn't really
is
mean
it's
480
because
years.
Amenhotep
Oh, the
II
length of
holds
this
the evidence
reign isn't
for
really
being
the
the
length of
pharaoh
just one
of the
pharaoh's reign, but
Exodus.
of more than one
So
pharaoh's reign. oh, this mummy that was found in Amenhotep II's tomb isn't really the son of Amenhotep II, but this other pharaoh, and on and on and on. Why? Why is the focus of all this argument on Amenhotep II? The simple answer to that is it's because Amenhotep II holds the evidence for being the pharaoh of the Exodus.
And the God of the Bible is also real, who came and broke the power of Pharaoh
that Amenhotep
to set his
II is
people
the pharaoh
free
of
so
the
that they
Exodus,
could be in
and his mummy
relationship
was
with him.
discovered in
The
his
same
tomb,
is
in his
available to us
sarcophagus,
today.
in his
It says in the
coffin.
Bible that
So
all
why does
people
this even matter?
are
It
enslaved
matters
to sin,
because the
but that
Exodus
God
event
himself
is a
became
real
a man in the
event.
person
Israelites
of
are
Jesus
real
Christ
people.
and
The
died for
Pharaoh
the sins
that
of
held
men
them in
to
bondage
break
and
the
slavery
bondage
was a
of
real
sin
Pharaoh.
so that we could
And
be
the God
free
of the
from our
Bible is
slavery
also
and
real, who
enter
came and
into a
broke the
relationship
power of
with the
Pharaoh
living God.
to
Don't
set
forget to
his
hit
people
subscribe.
free
It
so
really
that they
helps
could be
get
in
this
relationship with him. The same is
All right, y'all.
available
Mayor
to
Frost,
us
like, comment, and
today.
subscribe. Jesus
It
King.
says in the Bible
Study up
that
on
all
your history,
people
read your
are
word,
enslaved to
pray,
sin,
repent before it's
but
too
that
late.
God
God bless.
himself
Peace.
became a
Good night.
man in the person of Jesus Christ and died for the sins of man to break the bondage of sin so that we could be freed from our slavery and enter into a relationship with the living God. Don't forget to hit subscribe. It really helps get this information